Okay, so the company that I have picked for this mastermind session is Brambles, ASXBXB. Now, the reason that I like this company, I actually love this company as a company. I don't want to talk about it as an investment. but the Brambles' biggest company is Shep. Now, some people may be familiar with Shep's pallets, but I am just astounded that they have been able to make a business out of this. They have taken essentially a commodity product, a few pieces of wood nailed together, and have been able to charge an absolute premium for it. So the Shep business model is they rent out pallets to other businesses to then move their goods, in transit, on trucks, on trains, whatever it is. You rent the pallets from Shep. If you lose them, you pay to replace them, and if you damage them, you pay to replace them. And essentially what Shep have managed to do is take a commodity product, wood with a bit of paint on it, and charge a premium for it. So just from a business standpoint, I love the business model. The company, it trades for $12.15 at the moment. It's up about 23% year to date. It's not just Australian. Operates in 60 countries across 3 major segments, pallets being the main one, returnable plastic crates or reusable plastic crates, the second one, and then containers as the third one. It does about $6 million in revenue, and it made about $800 million in profit off that revenue. So it's a big company. And it has about 500 million pallets, crates, or containers out in the market. So it's a big driver. It's a giant in the logistics space. It enables a lot of transport. But the reason one of the reasons why I think it's a great company is that Australia has a real structural problem that really works for Shep's Australian business's advantage. And that is, for whatever reason, Australia decided that it wants different dimensioned pallets to every other country. So there's an Australian standard pallet and then there's an international standard pallet. And what that means is that if there are overseas players that want to sell, logistics solutions, sell pallets into Australia, then they've got to produce a whole different dimension of pallets to satisfy the Australian market. So Shep having an Australian arm and being well established in Australia has a sort of structural advantage over some of its international competition. And then the last thing that I like about it, and the reason why I've chosen it this time, is that it's proven to be an adept buyer and seller of businesses in the space. And so recently it sold its European plastic container business for about US $2.5 billion, which it bought about a decade ago for $1.25 billion. So it's been a really good allocator of capital, I guess, in that transaction, bought at the bottom of the market, coming out of the concerns around the GFC, and a decade later sold it for double that amount of money. And it's using that money to pay down some debt, to shore up its balance sheet, to buy back some shares, and then pay a one-off. It's not calling it a dividend, it's calling it a cash return, I think. And I just think that the company's putting itself in a really good place for whatever comes next. If there is some market uncertainty driven by a trade war and a slowdown in global trade, I think Brambles may be in a good position to pick up another company on the cheap like it did in 2010. Yeah, that's why I've chosen it for this one.
Nice, Ren. I think I can certainly understand what you're talking about, because we use, obviously, we have to use Shep through work, and I think it's got a fantastic moat, and we definitely experience the difficulties in terms of having to comply with Shep if we're talking to international suppliers and trying to bring stuff in. So they are positioned really well. I guess my only question is, the wooden pallet has done pretty well for itself over the last few years. I know that a number of organisations in retail are starting to just try to disrupt that in terms of the using different materials to make pallets at different sizes that I guess fit the future of retail distribution. Is this something Brambles and Shep themselves, do you think, will start to innovate themselves, or how do you see them playing in the space of pallets outside of the traditional wooden 1400 by 11 or whatever it is?
Yeah, so it's a good question. Shep have a they have plastic pallets and they have different size pallets as well. So they're obviously playing in that space as well. I think if you think about the bulk of transit that's happening across Australia at the moment, there's still a lot of it that's just being moved by traditional freight. It's not being disrupted in the same way. Maybe more consumer-facing ends of the supply chain are being disrupted. So I think, there will definitely be disruption, but the timber pallet has survived a long time. And I guess that saying about trying to invent a better mousetrap may apply here. A lot of people may try and invent a better pallet, but timber's cheap and Shep's big, so they've got a few structural things going for them.
So I have a question for you, Ren. I guess looking at Brambles, they've done really well from the acquisition and the sale of this business, and shareholders have been rewarded through that buyback program where they're returning that capital. But buying the company now, what is it that's going to increase the share price over the next sort of 2 to 3 years? Is it, that we're going to see more CHEP pallets out there, or it's just purely acquiring businesses?
So for me, I think you would buy it looking to see it acquire something else in the future, looking for it to grow. I think we've sort of touched on organic growth maybe being more difficult to come by, and you sort of see that in their income line. Their revenue's grown, but their income not as much. So you'd really be looking at a catalyst in the form of an acquisition. I think you would also have to be a little bit concerned about the slowdown in global trade having an impact on their share price and on the volume of Shep pallets being used. So I think you'd have to be maybe thinking a little bit more long term with this one. I don't think it's going to be like Eclipse that rose over 100% in a few months.
So, Ren, when I think of Brambles, I think of it as an Aussie dollar play. And you mentioned that CHEP operates in 60 different countries. And I guess a major market is the US. An amazing performance by Brambles this year, up 20% in 2019 so far. So I went back to see when was the last time that Brambles had a better performance. And that was in 2013, where the share price rose 30%. And I guess the common thread there is the weaker Australian dollar. And that's one of the conditions around, the outperformance that we've seen from Brambles. So does your expectations around the Aussie dollar versus the US currency play a large part of why you like Brambles now as well?
So I don't have a good view on where the Aussie dollar is going against the US. So that hasn't factored massively into my thinking. I guess for people out there or people like me who haven't thought about it, what should we be thinking of, or how do you think about companies like Brambles in the context of Aussie dollar movements?
I mean, the only reason I ask is usually when the Aussie dollar is weaker, I notice a basket of stocks that tend to go up, and Brambles is usually one of them, Amcor's one of them, stocks like Macquarie Group, which have a lot of their revenue offshore, and stocks like Cochlear and ResMed, which have a large portion of their business in the US as well. So I guess it's been great, the weaker Aussie dollar on Brambles, but obviously over in the US, we've seen some strong growth in food and beverages as well, which has helped the stock this year. But great performance, up 20% in 2019. It's pretty impressive.
Yeah, fantastic. So, Ren, just a quick one to wrap it up. I'm wondering if Brambles or CHEP have any major competitors in Australia, or do they just have a stranglehold on the pallet business here?
So they do. Loscombe's obviously a big one, and then there are some other manufacturers, but Shep seem to have a foot in the door with a lot of the big logistics providers. So they have some structural advantages there. In terms of market share, that is something I couldn't tell you off the top of my head, but I would imagine that they have a pretty dominant share of the Australian market at the very least.
Yeah, nice.
I think I was reading somewhere that like 15% of timber used in the US is used to make Shep pallets or something stupid.
Wow.
That could be me misremembering that, but yeah, they're big.
Nice, Ren. Well, do you have any other questions for Ren, Julia?
No, I'm going to go back and have another look at Brambles.